a brand new episode of Virtual Coffee. My name is Alexa Collier, and on this podcast, I chat with small business owners. We discuss their journeys, pieces of advice, their perspectives, and sometimes I do solo episodes like this one. Now, today we'll be talking about it being the second birthday of Virtual Coffee, of the podcast. But before we get into that topic, as always, I'd appreciate if you follow us on social medias, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It's all at Virtual Coffee Podcast. You can also leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify if you'd like to. It really helps us out and helps others discover the podcast and helps us grow and share the goodness that my guests share on Virtual Coffee. As always, thank you so much for your support and for tuning in to this special anniversary edition episode. I appreciate you. I appreciate you supporting this podcast and listening. Thank you so much. Now, let's get into the episode. So it has been officially 2 years of the Virtual Coffee Podcast being live. I posted my first episode April 11th, 2020. So it was 2 years ago yesterday from when you're listening to this. Yesterday being Monday, you're listening to this. This episode is being released on a Tuesday. And it has been an awesome 2 years with the podcast. I wanted to review where we're at kind of by the numbers. I thought that would be cool to document so I could listen back on this in a year, in 2 years, 3 years, however long I do the podcast, and see where I was at here back then, now, and see how much I've grown. And then I'll share what I've learned along the 2 years of doing the podcast, and then ask what you guys want to see next. So diving into some of those numbers, this episode that you're listening to now is episode number 96 of Virtual Coffee, which is crazy. We're almost at 100. That'll be very exciting, and it'll happen just in a few weeks. And of those 96 episodes, I took a look, and over 70 of them are small business owners and early career professionals who I've spoken to and highlighted on the podcast. Now, I didn't count my solo episodes clearly because that's just me, and I didn't count any update episodes of repeating guests that we have back on the podcast sometimes. So that's 70 unique small business owners and early career professionals who have been able to share their story and their thoughts and their businesses on the podcast, and you have listened to all of them. And I just find that so neat. It really warms my heart being able to support those small business owners and give them a platform to speak and share their stories. So over 70 of them, which is crazy. Where we're at with number of listens or downloads is also what they call them. We're at 7,056 downloads or unique listens. So thank you so much for contributing to that number by listening to this episode. Right now, as of today, we're at 2,275 Instagram followers, which is also crazy. And I want to make a note that this isn't all about the numbers for me. I probably shouldn't have started with this segment. But like I said, I just thought it would be cool to document the numbers. And trust me, like, success for me is not defined by the numbers. And we'll get into that later when I talk about what I've learned. But anyways, we're at over 2,200 Instagram followers, which is so cool. I remember the day, I think this was in the first year actually, that I surpassed my personal Instagram followers, which was pretty easy to do. I'm not that active on my personal Instagram, but that was so exciting because those are the most followers I've ever had. And on Instagram, I have 290 posts, which is crazy. Like, that goes by really fast. It's a lot of posts. On Facebook, we have 128 people following the Facebook. And then on TikTok, 237 followers and 14,700 views, which I know are mostly from my one quote unquote viral Taylor Swift TikTok, which was cool. So yeah, I mean, in terms of those numbers, of course, I'm proud of all of them. But like I said, it's not what I'm in it for, right? The one number I am in it for is that 70 small business owners and early career professionals, like I said, being able to provide them with a space to share their stories and promote their businesses and promote their dreams, that's the number that matters to me. And that's the number that I'm going to keep on growing. So that's where we're at numbers wise. Shameless plug to go follow all those social medias to help me increase those numbers if you aren't already. But yeah, moving on to what I've learned, just reflecting on the past 2 years and even how I've grown with the podcast, right, over the past couple of years. And actually a lot of these, if not all of these, are themes that we hear on the podcast from our guests and from the small business owners who share their pieces of advice. So definitely shouldn't be any surprises here. Shouldn't be really anything too new if you've listened to some other episodes of Virtual Coffee. But the first being always going back to your why. Now, this applies to every single person. I'm pretty sure I've done a solo episode on finding your why. And it's just so important to always go back to why you're doing something, what your purpose is in life, at work, with your hobby, and why you're doing it. So for me, for the podcast, it's promoting small business owners, getting involved in the community, giving people a place to share their story to others who they never would have met before if it wasn't for them being on Virtual Coffee. It's to promote those smaller businesses who might not have the opportunity to go on a podcast or might not think to go on a podcast, and I'm reaching out and they're like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'd love to share my story. So just supporting those people who are following their dreams, just starting out, or who have those smaller businesses and just want to reach more people. That's why I do the podcast. That's why I do Virtual Coffee. And selfishly, it's so fun meeting people who I never would have talked to before and hearing their stories and having a 30-minute to hour-long conversation and just staying connected through social media. It's been really fun building that community, and that's why I do the podcast. That's why I post. That's why I still work on it. It's just to keep that community up because it's fulfilling. I love it. I really love it. The second learning being define success for you. So you define your success. I actually just talked about this with a guest today. We recorded an episode. It'll be out next week. But you get to define what success means to you. And this goes back to when I was discussing the numbers, right? Success to me isn't those numbers because quite frankly, I'd probably be disappointed in the growth sometimes. Like sometimes I get a lot of followers on Instagram. Sometimes it's really slow for months. And that would be really hard if that was my definition of success. So going back to what I said previously, success for me is growing the number of small business owners I talk to and promote, and growing the community in the sense that more and more people see and engage with and buy from these small businesses. That's success for me. And another important realization for me, especially this year in 2022, is that I don't always have to post every single week. So this year I've gotten really busy. Work's been really busy. And also I'm doing a design boot camp after work. And that's taking up a lot of time. It's like learning UI UX. We can dive into that in a future episode. But my free time is very limited. A lot of the free time I used to use for the podcast, I now use for that boot camp. And that boot camp is very important to me. That was a very intentional choice. But with that, learning that I can miss a week if I have to, and it's okay. Yes, consistency is key. I still stand by that. I know a lot of influencers and like other podcasters give that as a piece of advice of just being consistent, posting. I totally still agree with that. But if I need a week and I haven't had a guest lined up, like take a break, right? I don't need to post that week. It's okay. Because that's not success for me. It's not making sure I post every week, even if it means me not doing my boot camp or me not completing something at work, right? That's just not my personal prioritization. Work and the boot camp and Nathan and the dogs, right, come first before the podcast. And that's my choice. And that's goes into my definition of success. So just being aware of your limitations almost, or rather not your limitations, but of when you want to do something and again, why you're doing it. If I'm just posting something just to post, I don't know if that's going to be the greatest episode anyway. So why force that? Why force that? It's not worth it. It's not worth it putting out that type of content when my heart's not in it, when my why isn't in it. The third piece of learning, again, these all really tie together. It's don't get caught up in other people's stats and numbers and even their success. So comparison is the thief of joy. There are several podcasts who I follow who started around the same time as me and have many more listens, many more followers. And that's awesome for them. Like, that is great. And then sometimes I have to catch myself like, oh, it's okay that they are quote unquote more successful, but who knows, right? How do they define success for themselves? And like I've been saying, success isn't the numbers for me. So it takes me a second. I have to pause and remember why I'm doing it, remember what my success is, and not get caught up in their numbers, but rather be happy for them and support them and comment on that post. Congratulations. So just being mindful of that. It's very hard in this world with us seeing every single post from every single person. And it's just constant seeing others' success reels and highlight reels. So just being very mindful of that, to not get caught up in others' success, but rather celebrate others' success, because it lifts everyone up. With that, while it's important to not get caught up and compare yourself to others, I do think it's important to get inspired by others. I get many TikTok ideas, Instagram post ideas from other posts that I see from other creators. And of course, plagiarism is bad. Do not plagiarize, but rather get inspired from them. And when I do a TikTok idea that was inspired by someone, I tag them in it. And it just continues to build your community. And it makes that person's day when you were inspired by them. And it gives you a piece of content idea, right? It gives you an idea of something to post. And this is a huge theme on the podcast of building that community. And I also personally use the advice that my guests say all the time. That's getting inspiration from my guest and the people who I have on Virtual Coffee. Just getting inspired by other people. It's fun. It expands your brain. You discover something you maybe wouldn't have thought of, but then you put your twist on it, and now it's this cool, unique piece of content that you wouldn't have thought of if you hadn't seen that person's post. And finally, the fifth learning and last learning I wanted to highlight is engaging in the community, how important and how fulfilling that is. Just even as simple as commenting and liking other people's posts, whether it's small business owners, creators, influencers, just getting involved in the community and whatever that community is to you, right? For me, it's podcasters and mainly small business owners. For someone else, it might be other people who like video games, or your D&D community, or moviegoer community, right? There's infinite number of communities, and just getting involved with others who share similar passions and hobbies as you is very fun. It's just meeting a ton of cool people, like I said, who you wouldn't have met before if it wasn't for your passion and your hobby. And I just think that's very important to do. And again, it expands your perspectives. You learn about other people's stories, where they came from, and you just learn from others. And there is such a beauty in that. So those are the 5 things that first came to mind when I reflected on the past 2 years. I know there are many other learnings, but just wanted to highlight the top 5. And again, thank you all so much for keeping this podcast going and motivating me by listening and engaging in my community and on my post and content. I can't thank you enough. It's been an awesome 2 years, and I'm looking forward to the next year. We'll see where the podcast goes. And I'd love to know what you want to see next from the podcast. Do you have podcast ideas, guests who you want to see, small business owners who you want to see on the podcast? Please send them my way. Please tag them in my most recent Instagram post, and let me know what you want to see from Virtual Coffee in the next year, in 2022 and into 2023. As always, thank you so much for your support and for tuning in. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and happy 2 years of Virtual Coffee.